It's party time, my pack hunts. We've got the banned and restricted announcement out for us all to enjoy and roll ourselves in. And gosh, every time I look at it, I just start giggling. I freaking love what they did. Just, disclaimer out there. I'm a fan. I support it. Not just for what it did for Levia, because I do think she won from a lot from this, but namely because CC was just not in a state I was really enjoying. And if you all saw a drop in content, do apologize. That's kind of what was going on in the background as well. Starting to lose my love for the competitiveness of this game, but good God, it's back in full swing. Not only is Uprising incredibly hype, but this ban restricted announcement going to the Pro Tour is exactly why I love this game. I love the challenge of deck building. I love taking Dark Horse decks into a tournament like this, so I'm just thrilled that everything happened the way it did. So I've got deck lists below, just another disclaimer for the 3 builds that I'm going to be putting some time into testing and refining into the Pro Tour here. We don't have a lot of time, so anything that you all want to try, get back to me about in the comments or on Discord. Fully appreciated. So let's jump into what changed. So then just to touch on really briefly the changes that did happen, because a lot of other channels have gone over this. You've all definitely read the announcement yourselves. But for the Levia players lens, right, these are the bans, or suspensions rather, that we need to be really excited about. It's because Awakening was a card that made the Claws Levia matchup into Starvo really tough. It absolutely punished you for trying to win turn cycles. It punished you for using Husk and gaining a life lead. Awakening just let them find their discard effects more consistently, whether it was like Crippling Crush, Oakenold, or even just like a Naked Pulverize. And those consistent discard effects against Levia are always what's scary, right? Because Levia is very particular about what cards she needs to keep to turn off Blood Debt, especially when you're playing Claws, right? So just to see that gone, really happy about that overall. It's going to make the matchup definitely easier if the Starvo decks just don't even fundamentally change, right? Then we've got Autumn's Touch. Autumn's Touch being suspended means those Starvo decks that were trying to, get that extra turn cycle in where they're alive at like 1-2 HP just to return some, other dumb threat back into you. Well, now they're going to start feeling kind of the lack of life, I would hope, in that losing 9 Autumn's Touch means their block is a little bit worse throughout the game. And it will all start to compound because they really don't have that many 3 blocks in the deck at all. So I'm really excited about that because when you do want to put pressure on them, either when you're Claws or you want to, threaten pummels when you're on like Hybrid or Club, the less block cards they have in their deck, the better for you to get through with the damage you want to push. So absolutely, fine with this change as well. It also side nerfs Oldhim and Briar just a little bit. And I mean, why not? I mean, I wasn't playing those heroes. I wanted to beat those heroes with Levia, so I'm all for that as well. But the big one, the one that just makes me hope that maybe LSS does have Levia in mind for some of their decisions. They suspended Bloodsheath Skeleta, and oh my god, this unlocks the metagame for Levia, truly. OTK Viserai was such a bad matchup for any iteration of Levia. It didn't matter if you were Hybrid or Club, you were too slow to threaten them. It didn't matter if you were Claws, because they just didn't interact with you and let you fill up the graveyard by blocking and things like that for you to ever threaten them before they had enough rune chance built up. My god, OTK Viserai was as close to an auto loss as I've felt almost. Something similar to like Prism and Dorinthia, to name another one. It was such a bad matchup, and it really sucked knowing that Viserai was strong enough that you would go into a room knowing that he was, a solid third of like the top players were going to be piloting or something like that. So really thrilled for that change in particular, and that's really why I think Levia is a big winner coming out of this. I also do want to say I've been looking at some other channels and what they're thinking about tier lists and like winners and losers, and the card guys, love you Josh Lau, but he did say that Levia ended up a loser from this ban and restricted announcement, and I just couldn't disagree more. When a hero in all of its iterations has something like a Viserai auto loss looming in the room, to just know that that hero is effectively like gone, at least that playstyle of the hero is gone, that is fantastic for me. Levia was one of those heroes where you always felt like you had a shot sitting down from anyone who would just play the game with you. Any hero that is going to attack, any hero that you can block, any hero that you can swing back into without some funny shenanigans, that's what she wants to do. She's just a deck that has good numbers, that wants to play the same game everyone else does, but then just has really great power cards that are all gated around this blood debt being the real downside. But hey, if you're going to suck it up and play in the blood debt, have a lot of games on this hero, then she really loves knowing that no hero you sit down across from is that auto loss. So I really think right now, with Viserai gone, I would be more than happy to take her to an event, even one as high stakes as the Pro Tour. It kind of reminds me of the Nationals meta when I knew Levia just really didn't have a good time into Lightning Briar, but I wanted to take a deck that would beat probably anything else in the room if I played it right, had a little bit of luck on my side, and, of course, kept my cool, had some confidence. So I took Levia, and exactly what I thought happened. Lost a random game to Blood Debt, lost my games to Lightning Briar, but, won my other 6 matches, and I really feel like this is kind of a similar metagame we're going to be looking at with something probably like Chain as the top aggro deck to beat, but Chain is a matchup that Levia actually can match fairly well. She's a deck that doesn't need to take like 4 turns or so to build up to her oppressive damage. She can just have it out of the blue. So if Chain's the best deck in the room, that's at least an even matchup for Levia. And all these other aggro decks that might start popping up to try to target like the control decks, to target Prism. Levia also has the same things going for them as she does against Chain. And she also has really great play into control decks. If you're playing Claws, you can bring in your recursion pieces. If you're playing Club, you can stack your Intimidates. And there's just a lot that you can do with Levia right now to take on a metagame where she just doesn't have an auto loss looming. So I really think she is a winner right now. I'm just so thrilled to put some real test games in on her and know that she's a truly competitively viable deck in the room, because I believe it is. I need some more test games behind it to say so for certain, but I'm excited. So Claws Levia is in a place right now, I think, to really overperform. That's because she's a deck that, if she's not in a fundamentally flawed matchup, is a deck that just by numbers will be overwhelming and will get to the point where her lose condition is herself. And if you know how to manage that and play a little tricky in some matchups, then she will be a powerhouse. She just has the numbers to do it. She's got enough threat in her deck. She's got explosive potential behind Blood Rush. She's got anti-control pieces with her recursion package. It's just about seeing stuff like her Blood Rush Bellows, her Art of Wars, because she's got this unfortunate kind of trickle effect where if you don't see that first power card early enough, you're not going to see your next ones when they matter, when you can actually, say no blocks, keep your hands, and return overwhelming damage for the turn cycle. If you find that first Art of War, if you find that first Blood Rush, it draws you closer to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So she needs to get the ball rolling and to really be that powerful deck. So there's always that's going to come up, right? But she's only got a couple like fundamentally unfavored matchups right now, and I don't really think many of them, right? There is Lightning Lexi, or even kind of just like a more vanilla Lexi that can run Sleep Dart with attack reactions like Lightning Press to make sure it hits. And that obviously is something that will hurt you a lot. You are going to be building up a lot of blood debt. That's something you need to watch out for. Katsu is another deck that does make you play his game. It's very hard for you to just say, all right, like I'm going to keep this full hand to pop off with Art of War, because he's going to demand interaction because he's always threatening to search the rest of his combo lines. So that's another matchup where you don't necessarily get to do what you want. You do need to manage his game as well as your game, and that can put a lot of stress on your card management. And then we've got Kano, which you can put cards in your deck to beat. You can put stuff like Shadow Blasphemfet to start building up your recursion engine really quickly, so you don't worry about the fact that you aren't blocking. But he's probably just not worth putting those cards in your deck for. It's a lot of space. It's the arcane barrier pieces too, right? So I just don't think you need to be super worried. If you lose to it, you lose to it. C'est la vie. But at least he won't ever be as prevalent as Viserai, I hope. Viserai, I don't know where he stands right now. He definitely suffered a massive change. So just don't know where to place him as of yet. But he definitely used to be an unfavored matchup. Then you've got a bunch of even matchups where, these are decks that are really just trying to put the pressure on you. You're trying to put the pressure on them. And it's that whole chain effect of Blood Rushes and Art of Wars that I talked about already. Nothing too fancy about those matchups. You've got a lot of favored matchups, but you need to know how to play these matchups. You don't ever really get to just sit down across from your opponent and have an easy game with Levia. It's not the kind of hero she is. You're always going to need to be cognizant of when your opponent has opportunities to interact with what you want to do, because Levia needs to enact her own game plan or she falls apart. So, Prism can interfere with this, like Bravo, Reinhardt, Oldhim can interfere with this. Dash less so. Dash I definitely find to be an easier matchup, but pretty much these are heroes where when you play into them enough, you'll start to realize where your advantages lie and know how to play into them to the point where losing means something just went terribly wrong. I think the lower row of heroes there for sure, Starvo, Bravo, Oldhim, Reinhardt, these control decks that you get to bring in your recursion package against are some of the easiest games you'll get to play, because the slower the game, the more you just get to be in control of every zone, your arsenal, your graveyard, your banished zone, and it feels amazing. And I definitely think she would have legs in like a pure control format if that ever came up. Now, Club Levia was a deck I was really hot on in the beginning of this last ProQuest season because it had a good matchup into kind of the older iterations of Prism and Starvo, but as those decks got more refined, she definitely started to hurt here. So Club Levia is going to take some reinventing, I think, to really find where she lies. But if I had to speculate a bit more on where she stands right now, she's definitely going to be unfavored into those decks that punish control strategies, because Club Levia is really just trying to play a very slow game where you swing weapon where you can, but it's really not your main goal. Your main goal is to build up to those turns where you get to return with a pummel and really say, you don't get to play with the resources you wanted to. And that level of interaction in Flesh and Blood is fantastic, especially when it's not necessarily telegraphed with the way you can do it off of like a 2-cost Tunic resource, a blue card, and a pummel. That kind of breaks the average math curve of needing 4 resources, which is normally 2 cards to play pummel and attack. No. You get to do this all with Tunic, and it's being very fluid. Your turn cycles almost play themselves to that degree, but what you do need to manage is how you're actually going to end the game. And so to end the game with Club Levia, it tends to just be a heavy pitch stack of these Intimidate effects. So you want the game to be long. You want to get to your second cycle because that's where your win con is. You're not just trying to go through your deck, find your blood rushes, and win the game because you just found enough damage in your deck. That's not how it's going to work out. So any deck that punishes that slower strategy is going to be unfavored here. So like Reinhardt absolutely cracks what you're trying to do. Prism as well can just be so overwhelming with auras that you don't get enough time before she's just completely overwhelming your board state. You can roll Scab Skins to try to keep up, but it's not, a game plan that's got any kind of consistency to it. Briar as well tends to sideboard pretty well if she knows that you're a control deck. And of course, setting up 5-card hands with like Channel Mount Heroic, what she can do with like Exude Confidence, the crazy turn she forces with Snapdragons. These are all really strong ways to get over what you can do as this kind of like, half-baked control deck, because you're not Oldhim, you don't have Blizzard, you don't have Channel Lake, you don't have a shield. You're never going to be as good as what Oldhim's doing, but you have that pitch stack to say, oh, you're at 13 life, you're dead. And that's the main difference in this playstyle, right? Viserai as well in the OTK form was absolutely miserable. Nothing you could do about it. Don't know where he stands now, however. There's definitely a lot of even matchups for Club Levia because she is a deck that wants the game to go long, and sometimes things can just get too out of hand for her to get the game to that state. Lightning Lexi can definitely just explode out of nowhere and put so much pressure on that you just hope that you can block out and be a weapon deck and win, but it doesn't always work. Starvo as well, even with the nerfs, should end up being like a pretty even matchup because you don't really get your huge swing in like a pummel CNC. That's never going to hurt him the way it's going to hurt another deck. And he also is probably going to slow down and run more of that Michael Hamilton build with a lot of defense reactions. And that as well punishes like how you want to play with pummels, right? Oldhim is a matchup that can really take you to time. If you know your deck well, if your opponent knows your deck really well, then you probably should win this match. You will just stack up, like a super concentrated, maybe 2 turns of barragings and just end the game, and that's fantastic. But, if you're playing a little slow, if you don't have a lot of reps of the deck, it's just going to be a double loss. Kano as well is a deck that can kind of play around your pummels. He sees that you commit your resources, you committed your whole hand, he sees the pummel, and then just can play his hand out as instants to try to punish you right back. So I haven't played a ton of games in that matchup, but it doesn't feel necessarily too favored for you. You definitely do want to take the Arcane Barrier 3 and not just scoop it. So then we get to the favored matchups, and these for Club Levia definitely rely on a bit of the surprise factor in that your opponent can never tell unless they've scouted you out whether you're going to be on like a, the Club Levia strat or the more aggressive Claws Levia strat or somewhere in between. So you got to use your surprise factor to your advantage here and hope that even if your opponent tries to like hedge their bets both ways, that they're not boarding like completely anti-fatigue, because that would mess you up a bit. But use that to your advantage, and these matchups should be favored for you in the end. So Club Levia went with like heavy defense reactions with her heavy reliance on just a very well-statted weapon, Romping Club coming in for 2 for 4. You can grind out a lot of these decks until they just don't really have a win con left. That's the case for like Ice Lexi in particular. You just kind of block her out. Even if she's making you pay for dominates and stuff, you can still just play defense reactions and be fine. Dorinthy and Katsu, you can just defense react out of the game. Bravo, you just match pitch stacks with Intims. Dash, you definitely need to run Arg Smash. You're the kind of deck that wouldn't be able to win without it versus Dash, but I mean, hey, that just gives you a silver bullet. Azalea, same thing. You're just a weapon deck that's going to grind her out. And then Bolton, if it's Lumina combo, you have CNC Pummel to just wreck his day, which is fantastic. It feels great. If he's Raiden, you don't even have that many attacks in the deck to actually give him the buffs, so it tends to be pretty favored. And then Chain, you do have to fully commit to fatiguing, and Levia can do this like actually pretty well. Her suite of cards supports this decently. You just need to make sure you're removing your blood debt so that invert existence doesn't, really screw you. So that's pretty much how Club Levia plays. I still really like this playstyle. I know it's basically kind of like a decaf Guardian version, but it works, and it definitely catches people by surprise. And stacking a full hand of barraging beatdowns feels so good. So then we've got Hybrid Levia, and Hybrid Levia was a really interesting deck that Nervash piloted to great success out in Hong Kong. And this was a deck that tried to use the two different strategies that were working against some of the top players in the format, taking Romping Club and using it to great success against the Starvo matchups, taking Claws and using it to great success against the Prism matchup. And you kind of go, halfway in between the two builds here. You're a Blood Rush deck, you're a Pummel deck, but you're not this crazy Explosive Claws deck, you're not this crazy late game Pummel deck. But it was enough to know that you'd go to a tournament, have good matchups into Starvo, have good matchups into Prism, but because you're losing some of the consistency of the other game plans, you are just accepting that there are losses in the room because you're not fully able to tech out when you're splitting space between two strategies. And something like Viscerai, Viscerai was just like a hard loss anyway, is going to be there for the past meta. Chain as well. You weren't fast enough to race him. You weren't controlling enough to fatigue him. And so a build like Hybrid Levia just has to make hard calls about what makes the cut in your deck list because it is so tight. So I think in a kind of an unknown meta like we're going into, it's going to be a bit tricky to know where the balance is between the two builds. There's definitely a lot of strength to having Blood Rush and Pummels in the same deck, but it's also not a deck that has a huge amount of consistency, I personally find. There's going to be issues that come up when you're playing like half a Blood Debt package where you do take some Blood Debt pings. And, sometimes you've got these Blood Rush turns, but you're drawing Pummels, and there's a bit in running the two packages that isn't as smooth as if you commit to just one thing, but it's definitely a build that definitely showed it had legs and can be built for sure as this anti-meta deck to answer specific meta threats. Finally, just to reiterate, I actually am going to be at the Pro Tour New Jersey in full Levia garb. I'll be in that cosplay trying to win my Taylor card, so you better vote for me. Vote for your girl Levia, rather. I can't wait to get there. It's going to be such a celebration of just why we all love this game. James White's going to be there. We're all going to get our Yorick cards. It's going to be fantastic. And I am so thrilled that this ban and restriction announcement came through to really make me excited for the Pro Tour. So I was feeling really stressed out, honestly, about do I rep the hero that I'm known for, or do I meta slave a bit? Well, now I actually can rep the hero I want and feel good about it, or at least think that I'm making the right choice. Maybe it is a bad choice, but I think I'm making the right choice in putting time in on Levia. I've got a lot of help from the community behind me on this one, the League of Levias. Everyone's been reaching out with test results, with what they think about deck lists, matchups, and that really helps because there's just aren't that many of us, right? So anything you want to share about Levia, Always feel free to reach out on Discord, leave some comments, and test these decks in the comments below. And hopefully we'll get our girl to her Living Legend points soon. We can do it. Not to rotate her by any means, but just to put her on the board. And with that, see you next time.